and deliver tough news. This is miserable part of the job. Supervisors, executives, if you are supervising people, there's going to be some point in your career when you're going to have to deliver tough news. It could be a negative performance evaluation, a termination. It could be a layoff. It could be a matter of change of schedule. It could be somebody's shift. It could be a benefit change. Who knows what it could be, but sometime, somewhere, if you are in a position of responsibility, you will have to be able to create and deliver tough news. So when you go through, make certain you explain clearly and completely, always project a very professional image, express empathy and sensitivity, make certain you're fair and impartial, and maintain friendly relations. This is not about you. You're not the one doing this to them. It's the circumstances that can happen. It could be the economy. If it's disciplinary action, they did it themselves. You didn't do that. They did that. So think about the process you go through. By the way, when you communicate negative news, sometimes you have to put it in writing, but you deliver it personally. If you are going through and you're going to send negative news by email or by text, you're a coward and shouldn't be a supervisor. That's my opinion, and it's a pretty strong one about that. Make certain that you have the courage to sit down and assume the duties of your responsibility and your position, that you're going to talk to somebody completely face to face in a human way, because that's a big thing. Be careful also. That's a cute little picture there about touching. It's dangerous to do that. Don't do that. Be careful about asking people out to dinner. They can always misinterpret that, even if it's before another meeting. So be cautious about everything in the workplace today. There's so many claims of sexual harassment, and many of them are legitimate, and some people misinterpret process, so be cautious about that. When we have positive messages, we use a direct strategy, and we use the active voice of business, okay? But when it comes to negative messages, we shift, and we actually have an indirect strategy. So we're not blunt, we're not direct. Be cautious sometimes about using a positive memo also, even though you may have a good intent. I had a case where somebody sat there, had a bad employee, and they were bad. They would come and talk to me about it on a regular basis. And then he stopped talking, and all of a sudden I got this positive memo to go in the personnel file in the human resources office. I thought, what is this about? And then I got another one a couple months later. I thought, what this is about. And then finally on the third one, I sat there and I called up the supervisor, made him come visit me. And I said, okay, what's going on with this person did bad? Well, they've been doing good. I said, but let me show you the memos. I showed her the memos. The memos were all positive about work that should have been done anyway. It wasn't that they were doing anything extraordinary. They were doing their job. Memos don't get put in personnel files unless somebody's doing extraordinary work. And then sure enough, 5 months after that third memo, she wanted to fire him. Well, frankly, his behavior deserved to be fired, except now we had a problem. Here she sits down there. She had 2 negative memos. One was 4 years old, one was 1 year old, 3 positive memos and 1 negative memo, and 3 good ones. If I'm in front of an arbitrator or a judge, I have to sit down and deal with the fact that I got these 3 things over here over a period of time, and I've got these 3 positive ones, and now you want to fire them? So this person in the last year has got 3 positive memos and 1 negative one. You want to fire them? That's a problem. So by the time it's all done, do not sit down and send positive memos for mediocrity. Send them for something that's really good. Don't try to save a bad employee with nice memos. You save them by making them do their job that you're paying them to do. Don't give a slacker a good memo and forget, because that person was a mediocre worker on a good day. That supervisor had multiple other people in her office that deserved to have memos, that were very hard workers, that when she asked them to do something, boom, they were on it, but she wasn't giving them the memos. She was giving the bad employee the memos. Always keep in mind who has your back as a boss. The good employees deserve to have the recognition out there, and sometimes they don't want it public, they want it private in the process. So the good memo stories, by the way, also the employee of the year, a lot of times my experience in human resources has been employee of the year is nothing but a political campaign for bad employees and mediocrity get recognition. I've seen it time and time again. Be careful if you have an employee of the year that you sit down and make sure the supervisor agrees that employee should get recognition because of the good work, not by voting by a series of people doing it, because a campaign can sit down, they may leave doing their job to go campaign for their position, and they may talk really well, or they may intimidate really well, but at the end of the day, as a supervisor, agree with the concept. When it comes down to negative messages, a lot of times there's ways of doing it, a direct or an indirect strategy. You want to use a direct strategy when the bad news is not damaging, when the receiver may overlook the bad news, in other words, they're oblivious to what you're saying, and or the organization has a specific way of wanting to make sure you clearly deliver the message, and when firmness is necessary. These are times when you're blunt and you're direct. Voice needs to be considered in the process. Sometimes you have to be active. Sometimes it's a matter of a contingency approach where on this employee I use this, on this employee I use this. Some people don't get it. You have to be blunt and direct in the process as you're going through. On the indirect strategy, use this when the bad news is personally upsetting to that person, when the bad news may provoke a hostile reaction. I've had to deliver a couple of these with a police officer present. When the bad news threatens the customer relationship, when the bad news is unexpected, that's when you sit down and you want to back off a little bit from the direct strategy. Keep this in mind, 67% of all lawsuits between the employer and employee, 2/3, result from not the employee being released, but from how they were released. On the way out the door, don't kick them on the way out the door. Treat them with dignity and respect, because you need to be a good person in the process, because you're not the reason they're being terminated. They are. Their actions are. Don't judge them. Don't criticize them as a person. You can criticize their performance, but not them as a person. And you may think it's a fine line between them, but it really isn't. Do not sit in judgment of somebody because you don't walk in their shoes, but you walk in your shoes. You have to sit down there and judge about the type of quality work that they're doing. If they're not cutting it, they shouldn't be there. So on the direct strategy, bad news, reasons, close. On the indirect strategy, put a buffer in there. And the buffer, we'll talk about that in just a second, the reasons, the bad news, and then close in the process. So you want to have a buffer. It's an open, with a neutral but meaningful statement. I appreciate you being here for 20 years. That's pretty negative. You're appreciating it's pretty neutral rather. So you want to have that. Then you have the reasons. Some of the bad news before disclosing that we've had a really bad year economically, and you've been here 20 years, and this is not a reflection on you necessarily, except for the fact that we have to lay off 5 people from the department, and you're one of the 5. Okay, reveal the bad news with emphasizing it, provide alternative or compromise as you come through. Again, end with a personalized, forward-looking, pleasant statement. Sometimes you want to sit there and make the statements, and if we have an opening for what you're qualified for, we'll consider you. Okay, but don't go back and refer to the bad news. Mention it once. One of the things when it comes down to writing the statement, keep in mind that that person, they're going to go out there. You have just maybe damaged their entire world because of the bad news you just delivered. Be careful about it and about how you say it, and also the fact what you write. They're going to go back and they're going to take that letter that you just gave them. They're going to look at it 15, 16, 20, 25 times and not understand it. And every time they read it, they'll get angry. Don't say too much in that letter. You may have to sit down and put it in clear writing, okay, but be brief, concise, to the point, and do not attack them as a person. Identify the actual physical facts that are there, okay? It is much, much worse to receive bad news with a written word than by simply telling you. I'm sure you understand why. This is a great quote. Keep this in mind when you want to go through and deliver bad news, or you have to deliver bad news. Generally, we use the passive voice, and remember the 4-part indirect strategy. Take care.